Hey, we're back in the Hammock Lab. This is Derek with The Ultimate Hang, and today I want to show you how to make continuous loops that are spliced. Now, to make a spliced loop is actually pretty easy, and there are actually a lot of great tutorials out on the web that you can check out if you just look on YouTube on how to make a continuous loop out of am steel, spliced loop, a buried loop. There's a lot of technical things involved in terms of, how deep should you bury? Because what we're going to do is use a hollow braid cord. This is some am steel, and today I'm going to use, this is 7/64 am steel, and it is hollow braid. So see how that bunches up? You can see on the inside it's actually hollow. There's no core, and that's an important feature when we're going to make or splice anything. This rope here is not hollow core, and it's a continuous loop. It's just tied with an overhand knot on the end, which is very common with some hammocks. We could also tie a double fisherman's knot to create a flatter loop. But to make a continuous loop, all we're going to need is a length of am steel. I don't use anything fancy like a fid or some special tool. This is just some telephone wire, and it works great for splicing almost every size thing from the 7/64 rope. This is, I believe, 2 millimeter Dyneema cord, and even the 1.75. This stuff is great, and that's all I use. Just some really inexpensive, find it anywhere telephone wire, and of course a nice sharp knife to cut stuff. That's it. Now, there are some of the tutorials that I've seen get pretty fancy about the lengths, how big you should make them. I like to make loops of different sizes, and I admit I eyeball it. Maybe it's just that I've done it so many times, but this is how I do it. So this might be different, a different kind of tutorial. If you want something that has all kinds of mathematical lengths and so forth, go ahead and skip this video, because what I like to do is make my loops fit specific hammocks or specific situations. So I have loops of different sizes. I typically start off with about 12 to 18 inches of am steel. You can go as big as 24 inches. And the way this is how I eyeball it, is I make my berries about 3 inches long, okay? And you can go longer berries. If you go much shorter than that, that's when you start seeing slippage. I think I wouldn't go any smaller than a 2-inch berry, just because they may start to slip. So the way I eyeball it is I take this am steel and I cross it over, giving myself about 3 to 4 inches on either side, and that is about the size of my finished loop. Once I kind of cross over and see, like, this is how far it's going to be buried on this side, and so forth. And so then I can say, oh yeah, that's the size I want. And again, you can eyeball that if you just have some am steel. Like, here's a whoopee sling that I have repurposed. You can kind of figure out how big of a loop do I want, and just cross over before you cut it and say, okay, I want a finished size. Give myself about 3 to 4 inches of berry on each side, and then I can cut my am steel right there, and then I can get to work. So that's, again, my very non-technical eyeball method for getting the length. So once I have the length, now this is where the surgery happens and why I need a sharp knife. Some people, especially on a smaller length cord, will go ahead and try to bury with just a blunt end here. There are some cases of breakage happening when you have a really abrupt bury. So what I like to do is take about 1 inch off of the ends, and I loosen the fibers, the strands here, to about 1 inch long. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to taper the strands. There's usually about 8 to 12, depending on what size am steel, 1/8 to 7/64. So you've got these individual strands and then the fibers on each strand. And I'm going to start tapering them with my knife. So I usually will do them in pairs of 2. So I take 2 and I'm going to trim it right at the end of that 1 inch. Like that. Then I take the next 2 and I'm going to cut it about halfway. And then I'm going to take another 2 and I'm going to cut them about 1/4 inch, or not 1/4, maybe it is 1/4 inch if I've got it 1 inch. And that is done with the cutting on that end. So you can see they're tapered. 2 that are cut off at the end, 2 halfway, 2 1/4, and then 2 the full length. And that gives me a nice tapered edge. Really simple. I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Loosen it about 1 inch. Two cut right at the end. My knife's already getting dull on this am steel. Two at the halfway point. And 2 1/4 inch. Okay. Now again, my highly technical method here. So what I do with my telephone wire here is I just make a bend in it. This becomes my little fid. And again, when I cross it over here and I'm looking for that 3 to 4 inches on both sides, so that where that point crosses, that's where I'm going to start to bury. And I'm going to put my wire and put it through the middle of that am steel. What I like to do is just poke those fibers in, bend it over, and they pull through real easy. Even them up, and I find the next place it's going to cross over. There we go. So you see I've pulled them through each other, so they're crossed over. There's my loop, and now I'm going to bury them. Now to bury them into each other, I kind of straighten them out and find where the last end is and come maybe 1 inch or 2 outside of that point. Loosen up the am steel, get my little wire here, and I'm going to feed it through the center of that am steel. You can see that it's going through. The nice thing about this wire is that you can find some that are coated. They're really slippery. It makes it nice and easy to slide through and not get snagged in the am steel. It's kind of like a Chinese finger trap. You can just kind of work it through, loosening it like an inchworm going through. And then I'm going to poke it out of the am steel just before, right in front of where I connected them. And this is the fun part. Suck it in. Pull it out, and this is what they call the milking process. You're just going to milk it all the way down. There, one side is buried. And repeat the process on this side. This is another reason why I like the wire, is that unlike any other fids that are usually fixed, I've got the biggest opening here so I can thread the needle super easy and then pinch it back down. And that's a lot harder with some fids that have fixed eyes. There we go. Milk it through. And milk it back through. There you go. Continuous loop. Again, this, I probably buried this a little bit more than I needed to. But now I've got a small loop that I can now put onto my hammock or use in other places. Thanks for watching, you guys. Be sure to subscribe to The Ultimate Hang and catch up with all the latest tips and tricks on hammock camping. We'll catch you next time.